Today we are going to talk about the concept of critical thinking. What is this and why it is so important, using specific examples. For me, critical thinking is a way of looking at things and facts from an internal angle. Non-critical thinking looks for me like a sponge that absorbs some information, but at one point it becomes too wet and can no longer absorb new information on the same topic. This is often the case with the conservative view, when a person gets an answer to something once and no longer accepts alternative options on it. There is also another type of thinking when a person, on the contrary, accepts any opinion of another person if he or she considers it more influential than his or her own. If you combine this with low self-confidence, you get a person who does not have his or her own opinion, but often changes it depending on the circumstances. But it is not known whether these changes are always for the better. Although I still like this type of people better because they are at least open to new things and it is easier for them to develop critical thinking. So what is the point of critical thinking compared to these examples? Critical thinking is when the sponge works more like an organ that can receive information from many sources and its own experience, filter these thoughts and come out with its own personal view and opinion. And if you can do this, it's very cool and you can be proud of yourself. It's not a common skill. But still, why is critical thinking so important? Of course, it is not as important as food or water, or basic human needs. Without critical thinking, you can live comfortably and even be successful in life in many ways. But without it, your inner world will probably sink. And life is far from being a stable thing. So if life puts you in a situation that requires you to get out of the bubble you've been in for a long time, when life gives you something new, you may not be able to cope with it, or you may not use this new thing for your own good. Sometimes people cannot help themselves because they have believed only one version of something all their lives. It can be religion, which often leads to psychological problems and trauma, or it can be stereotyping, racism, sexism, and many other destructive ideas that destroy a human life. And even in cases like specific research or medicine, it's not useful to accept it as 100% true. Science itself is a process, and it also largely uses critical thinking. In the scientific approach, something is true until someone else proves it is not true. Looking back in history, we see many examples where science was wrong. When we, for example, discovered radiation substances, they were even used to make toys, which harmed a large number of people. The same with medicine, for example, where homosexuality was considered a mental illness, and gays and lesbians were horribly abused and their lives and health were destroyed. And this was all at the state level, which would now be considered barbaric in civilized countries. Obviously, this was influenced by the homophobia of society. The vast majority were homophobes regardless of whether they were scientists or what status they had. Status never took away the human factor, which is very often terrible. So it is incredibly important to be able to think critically and study any information you receive, because only by thinking critically we can move to a better life. Only by questioning everything you hear you can form your own opinion, and of course this will not save you entirely from forming destructive thoughts. Even if you have thought about everything, you can never guess and know for sure that you have chosen the right information for you. And this is where the most interesting part begins, because critical thinking is not only a high quality study or something new for you, but also a look at your already formed opinions and positions and reviewing their correctness and how useful they are to you and others. Critical thinking is first of all asking why, then it is a search for answers. to this question. After that, it is a review of all the versions available to you and choosing the most correct ones in your opinion. Then it is self-analysis using all the information you have heard and finally forming your own opinion. But after that, this process will not end because at one point new information on the same topic may appear and it may be the most correct and useful now. So it is important to be able to let something new into your life and love to get familiar with it. We often grow up in toxic environments, we hear a lot of toxic thoughts and beliefs, and a lot of these thoughts are harmful to ourselves first of all. And it is very difficult in a society where something is normalized to admit that it is actually wrong, especially if it will cause attention and opposition from all the normalizers around. But although it is difficult to turn around and go in the opposite direction, it is still better than going nowhere with everyone else.